The sun hung mercilessly over the dusty plains of New Mexico Territory, casting long shadows across the weathered face of Samuel McKenna as he knelt beside his wife's grave. 3 years had passed since consumption claimed Martha, yet he still found himself here every Sunday, hat in hand, speaking to the wooden cross he'd carved with trembling fingers. The wind carried whispers of sage and sorrow across the cemetery, where other forgotten souls rested beneath the unforgiving sky. Samuel's hands, calloused yet gentle, traced the letters of her name etched deep into the wood. These were hands that had once held a Bible, delivering sermons to hopeful congregations in Kansas. But they were also hands that had pulled triggers, spilled blood, and counted stolen silver in the darkness of countless nights. The contradiction lived in his very bones, a war between the man he'd tried to become and the outlaw he'd never quite buried. Before I continue with this incredible story of redemption and forbidden love in the Old West, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. Your support means everything as we bring these untold tales to life. The town of Esperanza sat like a mirage against the desert horizon, its adobe buildings baking under the relentless sun. Samuel had chosen this place precisely for its isolation, where questions were rare and memories could be buried as deep as the dead. He worked as the town's carpenter and occasional preacher, his skilled hands crafting coffins and crosses with equal reverence. The townspeople respected his quiet demeanor and never pressed about his past, perhaps sensing the darkness that lurked behind his pale blue eyes. Every morning, Samuel would walk the dusty main street, nodding politely to the shopkeepers and ranchers who had grown accustomed to his presence. His routine was as predictable as the sunrise. Work until noon, a simple meal at Rosa's cantina, then solitary evenings in his small cabin on the outskirts of town. He lived like a ghost, haunting his own life, going through the motions of existence without truly living. But the desert has a way of bringing unexpected visitors. And on this particular evening, as Samuel sat by his fire reading from his worn Bible, the sound of approaching horses shattered his solitude. 3 Comanche riders emerged from the twilight, their painted faces fierce in the flickering light. Samuel's hand instinctively moved toward the Colt 45, hidden beneath his coat, old instincts dying hard despite his attempts at peaceful living. The lead rider, an older warrior with silver streaking his braided hair, raised his hand in a gesture of peace. Behind him rode 2 younger braves, and between them something that made Samuel's breath catch in his throat. A young woman, no more than 18, sat proudly on her painted pony, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight like polished obsidian. Her beauty was striking, wild and untamed as the desert itself, with long black hair that flowed like water down her back. The older warrior spoke in broken English, explaining that they sought shelter for the night. Their horses were tired and a storm was brewing on the horizon. Samuel, despite every instinct screaming danger, found himself nodding agreement. Perhaps it was the preacher in him, or perhaps it was something else entirely, but he gestured toward the small corral behind his cabin where they could rest their mounts. As the Comanche made camp near his fire, Samuel tried to focus on his Bible, but his eyes kept drifting to the young woman. She moved with a grace that seemed to defy the harsh realities of frontier life, her every gesture fluid and purposeful. When she caught him looking, she didn't look away as most women would. Instead, she held his gaze with a boldness that sent an unfamiliar warmth through his chest. The storm arrived with biblical fury, driving rain against the cabin walls and sending lightning across the sky like the fingers of an angry god. The Comanche took shelter in Samuel's barn, but the young woman approached his door, soaked to the skin and shivering. Without thinking, Samuel opened the door and ushered her inside, wrapping her in one of Martha's old quilts. They sat in silence for a long time, the storm raging outside while the fire crackled between them. Samuel tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. He was acutely aware of her presence, the way she studied him with those intelligent dark eyes, as if she could see straight through to his soul. When she finally spoke, her English was accented but clear, each word carefully chosen. "You have kind hands," she said softly, watching as he turned the pages of his Bible. "Gentle hands, like a holy man." She paused, tilting her head slightly. "But your eyes tell a different story." Samuel's hands stilled on the worn leather cover. No one had ever seen through him so clearly, so quickly. He looked up to find her studying him with an intensity that made his heart race. There was no judgment in her expression, only curiosity, and something else he couldn't quite name. "What do my eyes tell you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She leaned forward slightly, the quilt slipping from her shoulders. "They say you have walked in darkness. They say you have done things that haunt your dreams. They say you are running from something that follows you like a shadow." The accuracy of her words hit him like a physical blow. Samuel set down his Bible with trembling hands, unable to meet her gaze. "You see too much," he murmured. "My grandmother taught me to read the spirits of men," she replied. "She said the eyes never lie, even when the mouth speaks only truth." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "You've got the hands of a preacher, but your eyes say outlaw." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from the fire. Samuel felt something crack inside his chest. A wall he'd built around his heart, beginning to crumble. This young woman, this stranger from a world so different from his own, had seen him more clearly in one evening than anyone had in years. "What's your name?" he asked, finally looking up at her. "Ayana," she replied. "It means eternal blossom in my language. And you are Samuel. I heard the old man in town speak your name." "How do you know English so well?" "My father traded with white men. He believed knowledge of your language would protect our people." Her expression darkened slightly. He was wrong about many things. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin, something else was building. Samuel found himself drawn to this young woman in ways that terrified and thrilled him. She was everything Martha had not been. Wild where Martha was tame, bold where Martha was gentle, dangerous where Martha was safe, and she was Comanche, which made any feelings he might have not just inappropriate but potentially deadly. As the night wore on, they talked in hushed tones about everything and nothing. Ayana told him about her life on the plains, the freedom of riding with the wind, the pain of watching her people's way of life slowly disappear. Samuel found himself sharing things he'd never told another soul. His guilt over Martha's death, his struggle to find redemption, the weight of his past sins. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Samuel realized that something fundamental had changed. The Comanche prepared to leave, but Ayana lingered by his door, her dark eyes searching his face. "Will I see you again?" she asked, her voice so soft he almost missed it. Samuel knew he should say no, knew he should let her ride away and never look back. But as he gazed into those fathomless dark eyes, he found himself nodding. The old mission. 5 miles north of town, Sundays at sunset. She smiled then, a radiant expression that transformed her entire face. Until Sunday, Samuel McKenna. As he watched her ride away with her companions, Samuel felt as though he was standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that one more step would send him tumbling into an abyss from which there might be no return. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt truly alive. The week that followed passed like a fever dream. Samuel went through his daily routines, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying every moment of that storm-swept night. He found himself thinking about Ayana's laugh, the way she'd looked at him without fear or judgment, the boldness with which she'd spoken truths he'd hidden from the world. Sunday arrived with agonizing slowness. Samuel told himself a dozen times that he wouldn't go to the mission, that this madness had to stop before it began. But as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, he found himself saddling his horse and riding north, his heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. The old Spanish mission sat in ruins on a hill overlooking the valley, its adobe walls crumbling but still standing after decades of abandonment. Samuel had discovered it during one of his solitary rides, drawn by its melancholy beauty and the peace he found within its broken walls. As he approached, he saw her horse tethered in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Ayana stood among the ruins, her silhouette framed against the setting sun like something from a dream. She wore a simple buckskin dress that hugged her curves, her long hair loose and flowing in the evening breeze. When she turned to face him, Samuel felt his breath catch in his throat. "You came," she said, and he could hear the relief in her voice. "I shouldn't have," he replied, dismounting and walking toward her. "This is dangerous for both of us." "Many things worth having are dangerous," she said, moving closer until she stood just an arm's length away. "My people have a saying, 'The heart that fears to love is already dead.'" Samuel reached out tentatively, his fingers barely brushing her cheek. Her skin was warm and soft, and she leaned into his touch like a flower turning toward the sun. "Ayana," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. "Tell me about her," she said suddenly. "The woman whose memory haunts you." Samuel's hand dropped to his side. She was everything good in this world, pure, gentle, kind. She deserved better than what I gave her. How did she die? Consumption. I was away when it took her, chasing ghosts from my past, instead of being by her side. She died alone because of my sins. Ayana studied his face in the fading light. "You blame yourself for something beyond your control." "I blame myself for many things," Samuel said bitterly. "For the men I killed, the banks I robbed, the lives I destroyed. Martha married a preacher, but she got an outlaw instead." "And what am I getting?" Ayana asked, stepping closer until her body was almost touching his. Samuel looked down at her, this beautiful, dangerous young woman who saw through all his carefully constructed walls. "Trouble," he said honestly. "Nothing but trouble." She smiled, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw with her fingertip. "I have never been afraid of trouble." As the last light of day faded into purple twilight, Samuel felt the last of his resistance crumble. He pulled Ayana into his arms, crushing his lips to hers in a kiss that tasted of desperation and desire. She responded with a passion that matched his own, her hands tangling in his hair as she pressed herself against him. They made love among the ruins of the old mission, surrounded by the ghosts of Spanish priests and the whispered prayers of long-dead congregations. It was wild and tender, desperate and gentle, a collision of two souls that had been wandering in darkness for far too long. Afterward, they lay entwined beneath the stars, Ayana's head on Samuel's chest as he stroked her hair. "This cannot last," he said quietly, voicing the fear that gnawed at his heart. "Then we will make it burn bright while it can," she replied, pressing a kiss to his chest, "like a shooting star across the sky." But even as they held each other in the darkness, Samuel knew that their love was built on borrowed time. The world beyond these ruined walls would not understand or forgive what was growing between them. He was a white man with a dark past, and she was a Comanche woman in a land that was rapidly forgetting her people existed. Still, as he felt Ayana's breathing slow and deepen against his chest, Samuel allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, love could be stronger than the forces arrayed against them. In the distance, a coyote howled at the moon, and the desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility across the ancient stones. The weeks that followed their first meeting at the mission established a pattern that became both Samuel's salvation and his torment. Every Sunday, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, he would ride north to the ruins where Ayana waited for him. They would spend precious hours together, talking, laughing, making love with a passion that seemed to burn away the loneliness that had consumed them both. During these stolen moments, Samuel learned about Ayana's world in ways that both fascinated and troubled him. She spoke of her childhood on the plains, of learning to ride before she could properly walk, of the freedom that came with following the buffalo herds across endless grasslands. But she also spoke of the encroaching white settlements, the broken treaties, the slow strangulation of her people's way of life. "My father says we must adapt or die," she told him one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. "But how do you adapt to becoming nothing?" Samuel had no answer for her. He'd seen enough of the frontier to know that the tide of westward expansion was unstoppable, that the days of the free-roaming tribes were numbered. The thought of Ayana's spirit being crushed by the weight of an changing world filled him with a rage he hadn't felt since his outlaw days. "Come away with me," he said suddenly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "We could go to California or Oregon, somewhere no one knows us." Ayana turned to look at him, her dark eyes unreadable. "And leave my people? My family? Your people are dying." "Ayana, you said so yourself." "All the more reason to stay with them," she replied firmly. "I will not abandon them in their darkest hour." It was one of the things he loved most about her, her fierce loyalty, her unwavering courage. But it was also what made their situation so impossible. She would never leave her people, and he could never ask her to choose between them and him. As autumn gave way to winter, their meetings became more dangerous. The weather was unpredictable, and there were increasing reports of tensions between the local ranchers and the Comanche bands that still roamed the territory. Samuel heard whispers in town of a cavalry unit being stationed nearby, of plans to move the remaining tribes to reservations far to the south. One Sunday in December, Ayana arrived at the mission with news that chilled Samuel to the bone. "My father has arranged a marriage for me," she said without preamble. Her voice carefully controlled. Samuel felt as though he'd been punched in the gut. "What?" "To a warrior named Takoda. He is brave and strong, and my father believes the alliance will strengthen our band." She looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "The ceremony is in 2 weeks." "No," Samuel said, reaching for her hands. "You can't marry him. You don't love him." "Love is a luxury my people can no longer afford," Ayana replied, though her voice cracked slightly. "We must think of survival now." Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly he was afraid he might break her. "Run away with me. Tonight we'll go so far they'll never find us." For a moment he felt her waver, felt her body relax against his, as if she might actually say yes. But then she pulled back, her face set with determination. "I cannot. You know I cannot." They made love that night with a desperation that bordered on violence, as if they could somehow hold back time through the sheer force of their passion. But when dawn came, Ayana dressed silently and prepared to leave. And Samuel knew with crushing certainty that he was losing her. 2 weeks, she said as she mounted her horse. After that, you'll be another man's wife." Samuel finished bitterly. She nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Samuel. I'm so sorry." As he watched her ride away, Samuel felt something die inside him. The fragile hope he'd been nurturing, the dream of a future with this remarkable woman, crumbled to dust. He was alone again, more alone than he'd ever been, even in the depths of his grief for Martha. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of whiskey and despair. Samuel barely left his cabin, ignoring the concerned inquiries of his neighbors and the mounting pile of work orders on his desk. He drank to forget, but the alcohol only made the memories sharper, more painful. He could still smell Ayana's hair, still feel the warmth of her skin against his, still hear her whispered words of love in the darkness. On the night before her wedding, Samuel sat in his cabin with his Colt 45 in his lap, seriously considering ending his misery once and for all. He'd lost Martha to disease, and now Ayana to duty, and he couldn't bear the thought of continuing to exist in a world that seemed determined to strip away everything he cared about. But as he sat there in the darkness, finger on the trigger, he heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. His heart leaped with impossible hope, but when he opened the door, it wasn't Ayana who stood there. It was her younger brother, Chaitan, his face grim with urgency. "You must come," the boy said in halting English. "Ayana, she is in danger." Samuel's blood turned to ice. "What kind of danger?" "Soldiers came to our camp. They say we must go to reservation. Father refused. There was fighting." Chaitan's voice broke slightly. "Ayana tried to stop the violence. She was shot." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Samuel grabbed his coat and gun belt, his hands shaking as he buckled them on. "How bad?" "Bad," Chaitan said simply. "She asks for you." They rode through the night, pushing their horses to the limit across the frozen desert. Samuel's mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. If Ayana died, if he lost her now when they'd had so little time together, he didn't know how he would survive it. The Comanche camp was in chaos when they arrived. Several teepees had been burned, and Samuel could see bodies lying motionless in the snow. Chaitan led him to a large lodge where Ayana lay on a bed of furs, her face pale as moonlight. An elderly woman, whom Samuel assumed was the tribe's medicine woman, knelt beside her, chanting softly. "Samuel," Ayana whispered when she saw him, her voice barely audible. He dropped to his knees beside her, taking her hand in both of his. There was blood on her dress, too much blood, and her breathing was shallow and labored. "I'm here," he said, fighting back tears. "I'm here. I was wrong," she said, her dark eyes fixed on his face. "Love is not a luxury. It is the only thing that matters." "Don't talk," Samuel said, stroking her hair. "Save your strength." But Ayana shook her head weakly. "The bullet, it is too deep. The medicine woman says—" She coughed and blood flecked her lips. "She says I am dying." "No," Samuel said fiercely. "I won't let you die. I'll take you to the doctor in town. He can—" "Samuel!" Her grip on his hand tightened with surprising strength. "Listen to me. I need you to promise me something." He leaned closer, his ear almost touching her lips. "Anything. Promise me you will not let my death turn you back into the man you were before. Promise me you will find a way to live, to love again." "I can't," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I can't lose you too." "You must," she said, her voice growing weaker. "For me, for Martha, for the man you could still become." Samuel felt her hand go limp in his, felt the last breath leave her body like a sigh. The medicine woman's chanting stopped, and a terrible silence fell over the lodge. Ayana was gone, and with her went the last light in Samuel's world. He held her body for a long time, rocking back and forth as grief tore through him like a physical pain. The other members of the tribe left him alone with his sorrow, understanding that some losses were too profound for words or comfort. When he finally emerged from the lodge, dawn was breaking over the desert, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded him painfully of Ayana's smile. Her father approached him, the old warrior's face etched with his own grief. "She loved you," he said in English, his voice heavy with sorrow. "I did not understand before, but I see now. She loved you as the eagle loves the sky." Samuel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "You will help us bury her?" the old man asked. "Yes," Samuel managed to say. "Yes, of course." They buried Ayana on a hill overlooking the valley where she had been born, where her people had roamed free for countless generations. Samuel helped carry her body to the grave, his hands gentle and reverent as they had been when he'd held her in life. As the tribe performed their burial rituals, he stood apart, his own grief too raw and private to share. When it was over, when the last prayer had been spoken and the last handful of earth thrown onto her grave, Samuel found himself alone with Chaitan. The young man looked lost, older than his years, and Samuel recognized something of himself in the boy's haunted eyes. "What will you do now?" Samuel asked. Go to the reservation with what remains of our people, Chaitin replied. There is nowhere else. Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch containing all the money he had saved. Take this. It's not much, but it might help. Chaitin looked at the pouch, then back at Samuel. Why? Because she would have wanted me to, Samuel said simply. As the remnants of the tribe prepared to leave for the reservation, Samuel mounted his horse and rode back toward town. But he didn't go to his cabin. Instead, he rode to the old mission where he and Ayanna had shared so many precious hours. He sat among the ruins until sunset, remembering her laugh, her touch, the way she'd looked at him with eyes that saw straight through to his soul. As darkness fell, Samuel made a decision. He couldn't keep the promise Ayanna had asked of him. He couldn't imagine ever loving again, ever finding joy in a world that had taken both the women he'd loved, but he could honor her memory in another way. The next morning, Samuel packed his few belongings and rode out of Esperanza forever. But he didn't head west toward California or north toward Oregon. Instead, he turned south toward the reservation where Ayanna's people were being forced to live. If he couldn't save her, perhaps he could help save what remained of the world she'd loved. He would use his skills as a carpenter to build homes for the displaced families, his knowledge of English to help them navigate the complex bureaucracy of their new reality. He would be their advocate, their protector, their bridge between two worlds. It wouldn't bring Ayanna back, but it would give meaning to his grief, purpose to his pain. As he rode toward an uncertain future, Samuel felt something he hadn't experienced since that terrible night when Ayanna died, a sense of peace. He was still broken, still haunted by loss, but he was no longer running from his past. Instead, he was riding toward a future where love, even love that ended in tragedy, could still transform a man's soul. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried out as it soared toward the sun. Samuel McKenna, former outlaw, former preacher, forever changed by the love of a Comanche girl who had seen his true heart, rode on toward redemption. In the years that followed, the people of the reservation would speak of the white man who came to them in their darkest hour, who worked tirelessly to improve their lives and never asked for anything in return. They would say he had the hands of a healer and the heart of a warrior, and that sometimes, late at night, they could see him standing on the hill where a young woman was buried, speaking to the stars in a language only the dead could understand. And if anyone asked him why he stayed, why he devoted his life to a people not his own, Samuel would simply say that he had made a promise to someone he loved, and that some promises were worth keeping even when they broke your heart. The love between Samuel McKenna and Ayanna had lasted only a few precious months, but its impact would echo through generations. In choosing love over fear, passion over propriety, they had proven that even in the harsh landscape of the American frontier, the human heart could still find ways to bloom like wildflowers in the desert, beautiful, brief, and utterly unforgettable.